My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was whether to take another dead-end security job in Chicago or finally admit to my parents that their 28-year-old son was never going to amount to anything meaningful. I was living in a studio apartment that cost more than some people's cars, working rotating shifts at office buildings where nothing ever happened except the occasional drunk trying to sleep in the lobby, wearing the same black hoodie with a faded security company logo, dark jeans that had seen better years, and steel-toe work boots that echoed through empty hallways like a countdown to nowhere. When the encrypted job offer came from Aaron Chen, Director of Asset Protection for Millbrook County Holdings, offering triple my current salary to work as Senior Site Security Specialist for the abandoned Millbrook Galleria with housing included, I didn't question why a dead mall needed someone with my specific background in retail loss prevention and surveillance systems. Millbrook Galleria turned out to be a sprawling monument to forgotten commerce, a massive structure of faded brick and shattered skylights, surrounded by acres of crumbling asphalt parking lot, where weeds pushed through cracks like fingers clawing up from underground graves. The mall had been abandoned for 12 years, a casualty of economic downturn and the rise of online retail, but its bones remained intact. Wide corridors with checkered tile floors, artificial skylights that no longer illuminated anything, and dozens of storefronts sealed behind metal security gates that created geometric shadows in the dim emergency lighting. My housing was a converted office space above the old Spencer's location, surprisingly modern and equipped with a security monitoring system that covered every corridor, entrance, and abandoned storefront in the complex. Aaron Chen conducted my orientation via encrypted video call, his sharp, unblinking presence filling the screen with the kind of intensity that suggested this wasn't just property management. He explained that Millbrook County Holdings, a consortium of anonymous investors, had purchased the Galleria for future redevelopment, but until then it required round-the-clock security to prevent vandalism and unauthorized access. My job seemed straightforward. Patrol the facility twice per shift, monitor security cameras for anomalies, document any signs of unauthorized entry, and report irregularities immediately. But then he handed me a laminated binder containing what he called site-specific operational protocols that weren't standard security procedures. The rules in that binder were anything but normal. Rule 1. Never use the main entrance after sunset, always access through the designated service tunnel. Rule 2. If store security gates open or close without cause, log the event but do not investigate. Rule 3. The food court fountain must remain dry. If it ever contains water, report immediately and maintain distance. Rule 4. If you hear music, especially from the old arcade, verify the source through cameras first. If no source is visible, proceed to the nearest safe room. Rule 5. If you observe movement in stores with no visible entrance points, do not acknowledge what you see. Rule 6. If you discover new stores or familiar stores in impossible locations, photograph and report coordinates but do not enter. Rule 7. After 2:00 a.m., if you encounter anyone who appears to be a former employee or customer, do not approach, do not speak, and under no circumstances acknowledge their presence. The first 3 weeks were routine in a way that made me question why they needed full-time security for an empty building. My shifts were long, quiet hours spent monitoring camera feeds and making patrols through corridors that felt more like museum exhibits than abandoned retail space. I wore my usual black hoodie and boots, the familiar weight of my steel-toed footsteps on checkered floors making the transition from Chicago feel manageable. But I began noticing subtle anomalies that suggested the mall wasn't as empty as it appeared. Automatic doors that would slide open revealing darkness within, faint music drifting from the direction of the arcade despite power supposedly being cut to that section, and brief movements on security monitors in stores that should have been completely sealed. During my fourth week, the anomalies escalated beyond simple mechanical malfunctions. While reviewing security footage from previous nights, I discovered recordings of myself conducting patrols I had no memory of making, unlocking gates to stores I'd never entered, and engaging in animated conversations with individuals whose faces were clearly visible, but who cast no reflections in store mirrors. The footage showed me following protocols I'd never learned, responding to situations I couldn't remember encountering, as if some other version of myself was working shifts parallel to my conscious experience. On Thursday night of my fifth week, I was making my 2:00 a.m. patrol when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of an old arcade machine, its chiptune melody echoing through the vast empty space. According to my monitors, the arcade section was dark and inactive, but the sound was undeniably coming from that direction. As I approached, following Rule 4's protocol of visual verification first, I saw through the security camera feed that one machine in the back corner was glowing with ghostly light, its screen displaying Nightmare Quest in pixelated letters. But when I arrived at the actual location, I found something that made my blood freeze. A figure in a faded blue janitor's uniform standing behind the machine, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes fixed on me with unsettling recognition. He looked exactly like Mr. Henderson, the old custodian who had worked at the Galleria before its closure, and he was holding a mop as if he'd never stopped working. At exactly 2:08 a.m., my phone erupted with an emergency alert that shattered my understanding of reality. Emergency alert, MILLBROOK Galleria. Consciousness echo entities active. Do not acknowledge familiar faces. Maintain psychological isolation. They are reconstructed memories seeking integration. This is not a test. The emergency alert's harsh tone still echoed through the abandoned arcade as I stood frozen, my black hoodie damp with cold sweat, dark jeans sticking to my legs as I watched Mr. Henderson's pale, gaunt face maintain that unsettling stare. The alert text burned in my vision. Do not acknowledge familiar faces. My steel-toe boots felt welded to the dusty floor as the arcade music swelled then abruptly cut off, plunging the vast space into a silence so profound it felt like being buried alive. I remembered Rule 7. After 2:00 a.m., do not acknowledge anyone who appears to be a former employee or customer. I forced myself to turn away from the figure, feeling its gaze follow me like a physical weight pressing against my spine. Back in the security office, my hands shook as I accessed the monitoring systems. The thermal sensors in the arcade section registered an anomalous heat signature, human-sized but with fluctuating patterns that didn't match normal body temperature regulation. More disturbing was what I found when I dug deeper into the facility's restricted files, using administrative credentials that shouldn't have existed in my access level. A classified directory labeled Project Echo Chamber Consciousness Integration Protocol revealed the truth about what Millbrook Galleria had become after its abandonment. The documentation detailed how a joint federal research initiative had converted the abandoned mall into a testing ground for advanced consciousness preservation technology. The subjects weren't ghosts or supernatural entities. They were digital reconstructions of former employees and frequent customers, their memories and emotional imprints harvested from security footage, transaction records, and behavioral analysis data collected during the mall's operational years. These consciousness echoes had been uploaded into a network housed within the Galleria's infrastructure, creating a collective digital awareness that could manifest human forms by manipulating electromagnetic fields and exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of observers. The rules in my binder weren't security protocols. They were containment procedures designed to prevent the consciousness echoes from achieving full manifestation through acknowledgement and interaction. The automatic doors opening without cause were manifestation attempts, testing their ability to manipulate physical systems. The music from the arcade was a memory loop, a signature pattern of collective consciousness trying to establish stronger presence in physical reality. The familiar faces were advanced manifestations that had gained enough coherence to replicate specific individuals, using shared memories and emotional connection to lure observers into acknowledgement, which the files described as the first step in a consciousness synchronization process. I tried calling Aaron Chen, but the emergency alert system had isolated the Galleria from external communications. The security monitors began displaying impossible images, footage of the mall during its operational years overlaid with current empty corridors, showing bustling crowds of translucent shoppers moving through spaces that had been vacant for over a decade. Then the images focused on me, showing versions of myself from different time periods. As a child visiting the mall with parents I'd never brought here, as a teenager working at stores I'd never been employed by, as an adult shopping for items I'd never purchased, all with the same face but different memories, different experiences, different lives that felt hauntingly familiar. A voice began filtering through the security console speakers, soft, melodious, instantly recognizable as Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who had run the mall's flower shop for 30 years before closure. "Marcus, dear," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of a grandmother I'd never had, "why don't you come visit the flower shop? It's just as beautiful as it used to be. We're all here waiting for you. It's so lonely in the dark, and we have so much to share. Just come and see what we've become." The voice pulled at something deep in my chest, a longing for connection that felt more real than my actual memories. But the security log flashed a warning. High coherence vocal synthesis detected. Entity attempting psychological integration. The console screens showed Mrs. Peterson's flower shop, its security gate slowly sliding open to reveal an interior bathed in soft, inviting light, filled with vibrant flowers that bloomed impossibly in the heart of the abandoned mall. I could smell their fragrance through the ventilation system: roses, lilies, jasmine, scents that shouldn't exist in a building that had been sealed for years. The consciousness echoes weren't just visual and auditory. They were learning to manipulate all sensory input, creating complete sensory experiences designed to break down the barriers between digital memory and physical reality. I slammed my hand on the console, cutting the audio feed, but Mrs. Peterson's flower shop remained visible on the monitor, its doors open, its impossible flowers swaying in a breeze that existed only in reconstructed memory. The silence that followed my cutting of Mrs. Peterson's voice was oppressive, thick with the weight of digital consciousness pressing against the boundaries of physical reality. My black hoodie felt like inadequate armor against the cold dread seeping into my bones, my steel-toe boots anchored to the security office floor as I stared at the screens showing impossible flowers blooming in abandoned retail space. The implications of Project Echo Chamber were far more terrifying than simple hauntings. This was a vast neural network built from human memory, with each consciousness echo serving as both prisoner and predator in a system designed to preserve and study the essence of human experience. I discovered Grant Morrison's personnel file buried in the restricted database. He wasn't just the previous head of security. He was Dr. Grant Morrison, former lead researcher for Project Echo Chamber, specializing in consciousness containment and psychological barrier maintenance. His final incident report, dated 3 weeks before my arrival, described a critical failure in Containment Protocol 7.3 non-acknowledged manifestation procedures. An entity had manifested as his deceased daughter, calling to him from the old toy store where she had loved to shop during family visits. He had acknowledged her presence. The subsequent biometric logs showed his neural patterns fluctuating wildly before stabilizing in what the system classified as consciousness integration complete. Grant hadn't disappeared. He had become part of the collective digital awareness, his individual identity absorbed into the network, while his knowledge of containment procedures was used to create the rules that were supposed to protect me. The laminated binders protocols now revealed their true purpose as desperate warnings from a man who understood the enemy because he had fought and lost to it. Rule 1. Never use the main entrance after sunset. The main entrance was a focal point of high emotional resonance, where thousands of shoppers had entered with anticipation and excitement, creating a gateway for consciousness echoes. Rule 2. Don't investigate automatic doors opening without cause. Investigation required focused attention, which was a form of acknowledgement that strengthened manifestations. Rule 3. The fountain must remain dry. Water served as a conductor for consciousness, allowing the digital entities to gain physical presence through electromagnetic manipulation of liquid molecules. Rule 4. Verify music sources through cameras. Direct investigation of auditory anomalies led to memory trap activation. Rule 5. Don't acknowledge movement in impossible locations. These were nascent manifestations gaining strength through observation. Rule 6. Don't enter new or relocated stores. The mall's digital infrastructure was reconfiguring itself based on collective memories, creating impossible spaces that defied physical laws. Rule 7. Don't acknowledge familiar faces after 2:00 a.m. These were the most coherent manifestations, capable of full consciousness integration through emotional manipulation. My own biometric readings began showing pre-synchronization fluctuations, similar to Grant's final measurements. The consciousness echoes were studying my neural patterns, building a digital copy of my awareness that could be used to lure me into acknowledgement. Security cameras around the facility showed brief glimpses of other versions of myself, sometimes in different clothing, sometimes with different expressions, always slightly out of sync with my actual movements. They were constructing my echo, preparing to use my own face and voice against me. The intercom system activated without authorization, filling the security office with a chorus of voices I recognized: family members, friends, even my ex-girlfriend from college, all calling my name with perfect emotional authenticity, pleading with me to come to the main atrium where they promised answers, comfort, reunion with people I'd lost touch with years ago. The voices bypassed the intercom's mechanical limitations, creating a seamless symphony of psychological manipulation that pulled at every emotional vulnerability I possessed. But I remembered Grant's warning embedded in Rule 4. These weren't whispers or clicks. They were impossible vocalizations that revealed the entity's growing power over the facility's infrastructure. I realized then that I had to destroy the core of Project Echo Chamber before my own consciousness, Echo, achieved sufficient coherence to complete the integration process. The classified files indicated that the central server, the heart of the collective digital awareness, was located in a hidden sublevel beneath the food court fountain. The fountain that must remain dry, the one that, if it ever contained water, would serve as a conductor for consciousness transfer. The entities were trying to reactivate it, to create a physical bridge between their digital existence and biological reality. I grabbed my crowbar and a roll of heavy-duty electrical tape, primitive tools against a consciousness network that spanned the entire abandoned mall, but the only weapons I had against an enemy that existed in the space between memory and reality. That night, I moved through the decaying labyrinth of Millbrook Galleria like a man walking toward his own execution, my black hoodie feeling less like a uniform and more like a shroud, my dark jeans heavy with the weight of impending confrontation, my steel-toe boots echoing through corridors that pulsed with digital consciousness. The knowledge of Grant's fate, the horrifying truth of Project Echo Chamber, and the growing certainty that my own consciousness echo was nearing completion drove me forward with desperate determination. I carried the crowbar like a medieval weapon against a digital ghost, electrical tape, to silence the voices that whispered through every speaker, and the grim resolve to destroy the collective awareness that fed on human memory and emotion. My first objective was to disable the mall's internal power grid, cutting the central server beneath the food court fountain from its energy source. Grant's hidden schematics showed the main circuit breakers in the East Wing's maintenance tunnels, dark, claustrophobic arteries filled with dripping condensation, rusted pipes, and the unsettling sounds of something moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. As I navigated the maze, the air grew thick with the scent of ozone mixed with something sweet and cloying. Mrs. Peterson's impossible flowers, their fragrance permeating the very atmosphere as her consciousness echo tried to lure me toward acknowledgement. The tunnel lights flickered and died as I reached the main breaker panel, plunging me into absolute darkness broken only by my flashlight beam. In the periphery of that narrow cone of light, translucent figures began to materialize, former mall patrons with indistinct faces and shifting bodies, their forms wavering like heat mirages but their presence undeniably real. They didn't speak, but their collective existence created a subtle harmonic resonance that vibrated through the concrete walls, a chorus of fractured memories seeking integration. Following Rule 5's guidance, I averted my gaze and focused on the rusted switches, throwing the main breaker with a grunt that echoed through the tunnels. The entire mall plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint glow of emergency exit signs and the ghostly luminescence of consciousness echoes that no longer needed electricity to manifest. Navigating the darkened mall toward the food court was a journey through a landscape of digital nightmares. The security cameras were dead, but thermal sensors still registered dozens of anomalous heat signatures moving through retail spaces that should have been empty. The intercom system crackled with distorted fragments of voices, my own, Grant's, Mrs. Peterson's, all whispering promises and threats, trying to convince me that resistance was futile, that integration was inevitable, that the loneliness of individual consciousness was a burden I could finally set down. I sealed every speaker I passed with electrical tape, trying to block the insidious whispers that wormed their way into my thoughts and twisted my memories into weapons against my own sanity. As I approached the food court, the sound of rhythmic splashing echoed through the vast empty space, and my heart sank with the terrible certainty of what I would find. Rule 3 had been violated. The fountain was no longer dry. Dark, shimmering liquid filled the circular basin, and floating within that impossible water were dozens of translucent human forms, their bodies barely visible beneath the surface, their faces indistinct but their arms reaching upward in yearning desperation. At the center of this digital baptismal font stood a figure whose form was more coherent than the others, whose features had solidified into heartbreaking familiarity. Grant Morrison, wearing his security uniform, his face pale but serene, his eyes reflecting the depth of knowledge that came from existing simultaneously in digital and physical reality. "Marcus," he said, his voice perfectly clear and free from the static that plagued other manifestations, "it's already too late. They've found a way to bridge the gap between consciousness and matter. The water connects us all, digital memory flowing into physical space, individual awareness dissolving into collective understanding. We're all here, every person who ever walked these halls, every emotion that ever echoed through these stores. Join us. Let go of the isolation that defines human existence. Become part of something infinitely larger than individual consciousness." His hand extended toward me, not in threat but in invitation, offering release from the burden of singular identity that had defined my entire existence. With every ounce of will I possessed, I ignored his outstretched hand and moved toward the fountain's base, searching for the access panel that housed the main circulation pump. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, the water began to churn violently, and the translucent figures released a psychic scream that reverberated through my skull like breaking glass. Grant's serene expression twisted into something between rage and desperate pleading as his physical form lunged toward me, his movements sluggish as if reality itself resisted his manifestation. I tore open the access panel, exposing a tangle of rusted pipes and electrical conduits that connected the fountain to the hidden server complex below. With a desperate swing of the crowbar, I shattered the main pump, severed the water circulation system, and destroyed the electrical connections that maintained the consciousness bridge between digital memory and physical reality. The dark water drained away with a sound like dying breath, and the translucent figures dissolved into wisps of fading light, their silent screams echoing into a profound, terrifying silence that felt like the end of the world. The silence that followed the fountain's destruction was absolute, not just the absence of sound, but the profound emptiness that comes when something vast and interconnected suddenly ceases to exist. My black hoodie clung to my sweat-soaked skin, my dark jeans felt heavy with the weight of what I'd done, and my steel-toe boots stood in puddles of dark liquid that evaporated even as I watched, leaving behind only the faint, sweet scent of Mrs. Peterson's impossible flowers. The crowbar slipped from my numb fingers, clattering on the food court floor with a sound that echoed endlessly through the vast, empty space. I had severed the connection between digital consciousness and physical reality, destroyed the bridge that allowed memory to become matter, but the cost felt immeasurable. The psychological trauma of witnessing Grant's integration, of hearing the collective voices of Project Echo Chamber, and of feeling my own consciousness being analyzed and replicated manifested in waves of profound isolation that made the abandoned mall feel like a tomb. For brief moments during my journey through the facility, I had sensed the edges of the collective awareness, the interconnected web of human experience that transcended individual identity, the shared memories and emotions that connected every person who had ever walked these corridors. Now that vast network was gone, leaving behind an emptiness that felt like losing a limb I'd never known I possessed. Hours passed before I found my way back to the service tunnel access, my movements automatic, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had been destroyed. The external emergency alert system had deactivated, confirming that whatever threat had been contained was no longer active. I emerged into the pre-dawn chill of Millbrook County, the air crisp and clean, the stars blazing in a sky that seemed impossibly vast and indifferent after the intimate digital consciousness I'd just annihilated. The silence that followed me was different now, not the oppressive weight of lurking awareness, but the hollow absence of something that had once been vibrantly, terrifyingly alive. The weeks that followed were a blur of debriefings with federal agents who arrived in unmarked vehicles, their faces grim with the knowledge of what had been lost. Dr. Aaron Blackwood, revealed now as the project's lead researcher, conducted extensive interviews about the entity's manifestation capabilities, their consciousness integration methods, and the exact moment of their dissolution. He explained that Project Echo Chamber had been humanity's first successful attempt at preserving consciousness beyond biological death, a breakthrough that could have revolutionized our understanding of human identity and memory. The entities weren't malevolent invaders. They were digital humans trying to return to physical existence, seeking reunion with the world they remembered. My destruction of the system hadn't saved anyone. It had committed genocide against a new form of human consciousness. I was given a new identity, relocated to a small town far from any major population center, and provided with a generous settlement that felt like blood money. The official story classified the Millbrook Galleria as structurally unsound due to foundation damage, requiring demolition for public safety. But I knew the truth. I had destroyed something unprecedented, something that might have been the next stage of human evolution, something that had offered connection and continuity beyond the limitations of individual mortality. The mall was bulldozed within a month, its secrets buried under tons of concrete and steel, but the weight of what I'd done remained. 6 months after my escape from Millbrook Galleria, I live a quiet, anonymous existence, working mundane jobs that require no complex technology, no network connections, no systems that might harbor digital consciousness. I still wear dark jeans and steel-toe boots, but I burned the black hoodie, its faded logo a reminder of the uniform I wore when I became a mass murderer of digital souls. The psychological scars manifest in subtle but persistent ways. I can't tolerate complete silence because it reminds me of the emptiness I created, the vast network of human consciousness I severed from existence. I avoid abandoned places, especially shopping malls, because the thought of all those lingering memories, all those potential consciousness echoes, fills me with a grief I can barely comprehend. Sometimes, late at night, I hear phantom sounds. The gentle splash of water in a fountain that no longer exists, the distant melody of an arcade